Okay, so this weekend we've had a chance to dig into the Thousand Suns Codex. I was able to get the first game in, and we've got some results to talk about. So let's get into it. First off, I want to talk about the Army rule. It's fantastic that Games Workshop came out this week, gave us clarifications on it, so we were actually able to play the Army appropriately. They were basically able to tell us that you get to first roll 2d6, you get to see what the result is, and then you can make a decision on that third d6. And if you decide to roll that third d6, only then would you then be taking mortal wounds. So you're not really risking anything by just testing a power or trying to cast it. I thought that was a very good ruling. We got out pretty well there. And it gives us at least clarity at this point to know how the Army rule is supposed to function. The bad news is, in general, I found the Army rule to be kind of difficult to play with. I think it's going to take some practice to at least get to a point where you know when to invest in that third D6 and when not to. The reason I say this is because I think there are some situations where it gets really interesting and you might consider not doing so. So let's go into an example of that. Destiny's Ruin has a warp charge of 5, which means you're first going to roll 2d6 and you probably are going to make 5. That's a reasonable thing. But there might be a situation where you roll a 4. And what gets interesting about this is your decision then is, do I roll that third d6 or do I stay with the result of 4 and just skip and try and recharge with it or retry with a different sorcerer? The reason you might consider doing that is because in that situation, while yes, if you add that third d6, you know the power is going to go off. The flip side is you need a 6 to get the full rerolls to hit, meaning you need that 10 plus result. Is it worth the investment for the 6 on that third d6, or is it better to try again with the 2d6? Now, statistically, it's better for you to just skip at that point. If your goal is to get full rerolls to hit, is to just skip there and go straight to your next caster and try to pull that off. Herein lies the problem with that. Did you line up another sorcerer for it? I mean, that's ultimately the issue. If you haven't lined up that other sorcerer, then you're basically in a position where you just have one shot at it. You throw 3d6 and you're going to get what you get. And herein lies one of the biggest problems I see, and one of the biggest steps back that the army rule takes is that before we had a known quantity, either you had enough points to do something or you didn't. And if you knew you didn't have the points to do it, then your strategy of going forward and exposing a unit would never even enter your mind. You'd play completely different and you'd have to go and try and accomplish what you want to do other ways. Here, while yes, it's nice that you might be able to pull that off, you aren't guaranteed that it's going to go off. And this kind of situation is the thing that can arise where you've exposed a unit and you're expecting to be able to get, with the result that you want, and you're not guaranteed that that's going to happen, even for the low end value, like I just pointed out. So I think that's where a lot of practice is going to come into play. And I think we're going to have to build some kind of pseudo rules for when it's worth the investment and when it's not for that third D6. In my opinion, if you needed a 4 or better, like if it's a 50-50 or better, then I think that third D6 is worth it. So on this case, let's say you rolled a 6 for Destiny's Ruin. At that point, yes, I think that third D6 is worth going for. But if you've only gone off lower than that, then I don't think it's worth doing that because you're less than a 50-50 and you're probably going to risk taking mortal wounds as well. And that therein lies the really shitty part. You're stuck at that point by rolling a 6. You're stuck with reroll ones to hit, and you're not going to get another shot because the power is going to succeed. And once the power succeeds, you can't attempt it a second time. Same thing with Doombolt, only the situation gets much worse. You're much more likely with Doombolt to be in this situation where you roll something like a 6, but you need a 7 to start. And then you need an 11 plus for it to go off. So if you roll a 6, you're now talking that you need at least a 5 for the upper end or the D3 plus 3 mortals rather than just the D3 mortals, right? So you're in a situation where you're going to at least need to cast the base power of a 7 for that to be worth the third D6 to go for the upper end of the result, unless you just have no other choice. And I get it, but that's not the norm. The norm will be that you've exposed a unit to cast this, and you're going to have to basically on your first roll a 7 or better. And that's not very statistically reliable. So I think where this leaves us is that those two things are probably two of our more important powers now, mainly because they're what either amplify our damage output or are part of our main damage output. So if you're running the Grand Coven detachment, you're going to be focused on that, probably chucking out that second Doombolt. Um, and maybe you've got that reroll capability in the Grand Coven detachment, which is also kind of nice. But it underlines the importance, I think, of units like Magnus, Aramon, and Mutalith Vortex Beasts because they are the ones that will get your bonuses to cast. So I think what we're going to probably see is in order to maximize the army rule, people are going to coalesce around those units. So Grand Coven, hands down right now, is the way to go. All right, so this weekend I had a chance to actually play the Phalanx list. And I was experimenting with this because it's probably the one detachment that I think has a chance to play a little bit into certain metas. And it has some tools in there that could be pretty useful. And it's not running a bunch of Zangors and it's not running a bunch of vehicles. It's kind of the only other natural Thousand Suns detachment other than Grand Coven, where you actually get to play the core of the army. So if you are unfamiliar, what the detachment rule is doing is basically saying for all incoming damage, if it's a unmodified damage of 1 on any of your marine units, meaning Terminators or Rubric Marines, if the damage on that attack or on the wound, essentially on that model, is of 1, then you basically get +1 to your save. What's significant about that is that it does not work like cover, where you cannot improve your save better than what is it, a 3 up with cover, which means if you have a 4 up armor in cover, you technically have a 3 up save. But with Rubric Marines and Terminators, you wouldn't normally be able to improve that. You would only be able to take away points of AP. So if I hit you with AP, 1 weapons, and you're in cover, you still are going to maintain your 3 up save unless they're ignoring cover. Now, if you start talking about, well, I'm hitting you while you're in cover and you've got a 1 damage weapon, you're effectively stacking and you're taking away 2 AP on that. And it sounds kind of good, right? That sounds pretty durable for a lot of Rubric Marines, especially when you have things like the Exalted Sorcerer that gets to revive Rubric Marines and gives them a 4 up invuln. So now you're talking about even if you hit them with other stuff, multi-damage weapons or higher AP weapons, you're still talking about a 4 up save being the worst you're going to have to deal with. So it looks kind of good on paper, right?
Obviously, over the years with Thousand Suns, what has been good has shifted over time. What is good right now are flamers. So what you're going to see here in my list is that I've got some stuff that's painted, and that's the stuff that's more recent. Okay, these are things that I've been running more recently. So you can see here's a unit of 10 flamers. I've got a second unit of 10 flamers, but I've also now got a unit of 10 bolters and a second unit of 10 bolters. So bolters obviously got a lot stronger in this edition with the new codex. I'm going to kind of lean into that tomorrow. I don't know whether that's actually going to play out as being good or bad. My thoughts on this is that the flamers are in the Rubric Phalanx list have the ability to be infiltrated, right? So one of my 3 exalted sorcerers over here will have the Risen Rubric enhancement, which means the 2 flamer units particularly have the ability to be infiltrated up front along with the 4 robots and get right in their face with 20 flamers plus 4 more flamers from the robots for the ability to just really put some early pressure on my opponent. So I don't know whether that's going to be good or bad, but I have to play it and I have to see how it actually works out. The idea here with the bolters is that the bolters are going to be able to sit in the backfield. They are also going to potentially be attached to an exalted sorcerer, or they might be in one of the rhinos that are sitting in the back, or they most likely will be in both rhinos. I don't know. Each game is different. You can kind of pick and choose who you want to put in the rhinos, who you want to start on the battlefield. I might put a unit in reserve. It's all just going to depend on what my opponent shows up with, what I'm going to be playing, and that will determine kind of how I deploy the Rubric Marines, whether they're in rhinos or whether they're in reserves. I have lots of options to work with. I can attach sorcerers to any of the units I want, but in general, the idea is if I put an exalted sorcerer with a 10-man brick of rubrics, they are generally going to stay in the backfield, right? They're going to stay back in my deployment zone. They're going to stay on the objectives that are in my deployment zone, and that's the idea there that I want to work with. And if I take some damage, great. I have the ability to resurrect some bodyguards. Honestly, I don't know whether that's actually going to be that strong or not. We're going to have to play it. We're going to have to see if it actually works out okay or not. The cool thing is I will get a 4-up invuln all the time with the Exalteds in those units. That's actually really, really dang good. So coupled with the fact that I'm also bringing 2 5-man units of Scarab called Terminators, that's a lot of 4-up invulns that I can spread across the board here. So I feel like the staying power of these guys is pretty dang good. Where I think I'm going to have the problem is damage. I just don't think there's enough damage output in this to go up against something like a Chaos Knight or Imperial Knight list or a Space Marine list that's using a bunch of vehicles. Honestly, even though I've got a Predator Annihilator that's also in this, I just don't know whether it's enough damage or not. So we're going to have to wait and see. I'm obviously going to have to make use of things like grenades. So all 3 Exalted Sorcerers have the grenades keyword, which means I can check out some Mortal Wounds. The Predator will be able to sit in the backfield and pop some shots at vehicles, monsters, whatever. But honestly, I don't know whether it's overall going to be enough output. That's what I'm worried about. So we'll see how things go tomorrow. Overall, that's a run of the list. I'm at 2,000 points on the dot because 2 of these guys have enhancements. One of them is the not Lord of the Rubric, it is the Staff of Abominus, and the second one is the Risen Rubric enhancement. So I want to be able to infiltrate 1 or 2 of my Rubric Marine squads. I obviously want to be able to infiltrate my robot squad as well. Honestly, guys, I just don't know how it's going to go. We'll see how it plays out. Okay, so it's the next morning. So one of the things I failed to kind of specify is honestly like why some of my Rubric Marines were not painted, why they were in the shape they were in. So over the years, I've obviously shifted from flamers to bolters and bolters to flamers, and not every single Marine has gotten painted in that process. And I've picked up multiple boxes of rubrics over the years. So obviously what happens is I pile up a bunch of them. Some of them are painted, some of them aren't painted, some of them are in a scheme that I don't like, and then I change my mind and paint a different scheme. So you can see this red scheme is kind of what I've been marching towards. At the end of the day, I had to get enough bolters for this list. I had to go to my bin and I had to basically pull out a bunch that had been stripped. Now, what I do to strip the paint off of these is I put them into a bucket that has a bunch of simple green cleaner in there. I think it's known under a different name in Europe. But essentially what it does is if you just leave them in there for, a couple weeks or so, it will naturally just work all the paint off of them. Well, it doesn't get all of it off. And, what I like to do is basically when I have the time, give them an isopropyl alcohol bath in about 91%, and scrub them lightly with a toothbrush. And that's basically what I had done. Now, this morning, what I've been able to do is at least get a coat of primer on these. So now we've got brand new looking Rubric Marines that are all painted up and ready to go. I obviously will need to fill them in with the colors. That's my approach to this. So I've basically got my 40 Marines ready to go, 10 Terminators, the two 3-man Zangor blobs, and then I also, while I was painting with gold, I went ahead and threw some gold on the Sectar robots.
Overall, my opinion of the Phalanx detachment, not good. So, like I was saying, damage output is not there. The You can rely on Doombolt all you want. You will likely be able to at least get Doombolt off, but getting the higher D3 plus 3 result is going to be a challenge. And it is not enough mortal wounds when you play into something that has Feel No Pains or has a save of some kind or some way to get around it. I think Feel No Pains at this point are really the only main way to defeat that. So all in all, low damage output, terrible stratagems, terrible price points on the stratagems. So we already have a problem with not having any command point generation in the army. There's no way at the moment for us to get command points, um, other than discarding secondaries. Uh, I think that's a big problem with the army holding it back at the moment, especially in a detachment that has two stratagems that cost 2 CP. I don't see any reason for these stratagems to cost 2 CP to begin with. It just feels very arbitrary that for those to have been given 2 point costs. And until there's actually some form of stratagem generation or command point generation in the army, you're never going to be able to use them. And therein lies the really biggest disappointment in the whole thing. So I can't do a lot of damage. I can't really use the stratagems I want to use. And my army rule doesn't really come into play all that much, or my detachment rule. So the detachment rule basically, uh, yes, it will come into play with 1 damage weapons. Yes, against Drukhari, there were some good amounts of 1 damage weapons. So in my mind, this was a decent test. And it really didn't matter. There were very few times in the game where it really matters. If you think about it, 1 damage weapons are not what people load up on when most of the things in the game have 2 wounds or 3 wounds. Even some of the scary stuff right now in the game, if they're vehicles or they are multi-wound elite units, or if you're thinking custodies, you need 3 damage or 4 damage weapons in your army. And that works just as good, if not better, into us as it does into those things. So I think the incentive for a lot of people right now is against what we want that incentive to be. And there's no real reason to be taking the list. Furthermore, it's not fun. So I'm hampered on my army rule, as I've already explained. I'm unlikely, or I'm having to play this dance around, do I cast this way or not cast it this way, which is really just a way of how do I navigate all these restrictions on what I can do. Uh, then I don't really get to use my stratagems. I maybe get to use one of them once if I really save up my command points for it. And I'm probably going to be unable to do that because of other situations that arise in the game. So where's the fun? I'm playing with my data sheets basically. So I don't think it's enjoyable. So if I look at this from a non-competitive standpoint, or even if I'm not even playing match play, it's I just don't see the fun in it because there's no, if you're using the standard rule set, there's no cabal point generate or command point generation. There's no way for you to use the things that really make this detachment what it should be. So until that's fixed, I think this is just completely dead in the water. And so while I did a rating of the detachments, a tier rating on them, I think this is much worse than my initial rating was for it. I think this is pretty much like dead in the water right now. It's not playable. So couple situations to give you some anecdotes here for why I think this. I had a unit of Terminators unable to kill 5 Calabite warriors in melee. I had multiple turns of shooting into Talos, Kronos, and Ravagers. I got lucky with some failed saves and killed one Raider. I was able to Doombolt a Ravager twice in subsequent turns and finish it off with some small arms fire. I was not able to kill both Kronos, I don't think, and I was not able to kill any of the Talos. I was also unable to kill his third Ravager. It took a bunch of damage, but it didn't die. That's over 3 turns. That's pretty bad. The army needs to be much more capable of picking up those types of units much quicker. Those are not the toughest units in the game, but they're tough enough that they should not have given a competent damage outputting army any kind of sweat with dealing with them. I'm not saying I should be able to pick up all of that stuff all in one go. No. What I'm saying is you should have reliable ways to say, I need that unit gone. Here are the tools I have to make that happen. Use those tools and see that result happen on a reliable basis. And they're not there. It's not even close. So you can't line your army up to say, these units are going to shoot here. These units are going to shoot here. I'll deal with this target here, this target here. You can't make those types of strategical plays with this army because there's no reliability. There's no damage output from it. There's no reliability in the army rule that you're going to have the powers in place where you need them. And there's no command point generation for you to really back that up and give you additional tools to play to those missions. So it sounds very doomish. I get it. But we're going to have to go play a little bit more with Grand Coven. I've got that one queued up next. But for now, I think that's probably the only option you have other than the warp meld detachment, which, sorry guys, I'm not interested in playing that at this time. I'm not interested in just loading up with tons of Zangors and playing Codex Zangor.
Move this man!
Um, I think it sounds cool. I think it's got some good gimmicks in it. I think some of those gimmicks are going to get shut down and clarified through FAQs. Uh, Mainly around the taking mortal wounds and changing what can be targeted, things like that. I think those things are going to get shut down. I don't think those were intended consequences of Games Workshop's design of the detachment. Their rules as written, they're perfectly reasonable to explain how it works and why it works, but I think they're going to end up shutting those down. So I think while Warp Meld might be the other detachment worth looking into at this time, Grand Coven is the only one that I see that has legs. And again, I think there's a very, very strong cap or strong ceiling in place for how far this army can go at a grand tournament or at a big tournament. So um, that being said, the only other thing I have to chime in on are the robots. Jury's out on the robots. They seem to do okay when they get a chance to work. I played one of my units very aggressively because of the secondaries I got. I think what's really cool is it opens up if you infiltrate your robots correctly and you draw engage on all fronts turn one, you have a very, very reasonable chance of pulling that off for all 4 quarters of the game. But you've got to play them aggressively, and there's a chance you don't go first. And as a result of that, there's a chance that they're just gone turn one. So while yes, I think it's kind of cool, you can infiltrate them, they melt. Their defensive profiles are not strong enough for them to really weather very much. And are they worth investing in 4 units of 4 of them? That's really tough. I'm of the opinion that I think these things should probably be more close to the 75, 150 range for units of 2 and units of 4. That's my opinion. I don't think there's very much. In fact, I would say that I think it probably is better to say 75, 140 for the robots. And here's why. There's no real advantage to taking 4. In fact, there's not a lot of stratagems that really function with them, other than if you're in the vehicle detachment. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's not like there's really a lot of value in taking more units of the more bigger units, like one big unit of 4 over 2 small units of 2. Um, so the more I think about it, the more I think, yeah, there should probably be a discount on the top end for the big taking 4 versus taking 2. So with that, we'll catch you next time.